Released in 2010 by Telltale, Poker Night at the Inventory was removed from Steam in 2019 when the studio closed, spending years in that classic you'll never play again limbo. Until now. With the remaster arriving and bringing this poker table back to life, an entire new generation will sit across from Strong Bad Max, Tycho, and the Heavy, and most will play it the same way everyone did back then. Trying to grab the items, laughing at the dialogue, and leaving without noticing half of what the game had to offer. So before you join the table thinking you know it all, let me show you 10 facts about Poker Night at the Inventory that most people have no clue about. Stick around, because the video is about to start. The Inventory, the club where the matches take place, has always had an aura of being a special, mysterious place. But now, the remaster has filled the environment with new visual details and clues about the history of this location. The detail that sets the tone is that in the game's fiction, this club has existed since 1919. Think about what that means narratively. While you're sitting at the table trying to read the Heavy's bluff, there's over 100 years of fictional history accumulated on the walls around you. This type of environmental world building is something big games do very well, and often goes unnoticed by those not paying attention. You don't need to read anything, pause the game, or leave the mesh to absorb it. The details are there, scattered throughout the setting, and gradually you begin to build an image of what this club represents within the fiction. Who frequented this place before these characters? What happened at these tables in decades past? These questions don't need explicit answers to work. What Skunk Ape did here was transform a setting that was essentially a decorative background into a silent character in the narrative. The Inventory now breathes history, and that enriches every match in a subtle but real way. It's the kind of detail that separates a team that loves what they do from a team just checking boxes. Since these are the same people who created the original game, it makes total sense that they'd want to expand the lore of a place they invented themselves. The remaster keeps the unlockable cosmetic items for Team Fortress 2 on Steam, including the Heavy's famous Iron Curtain. Look, this might seem like a technical detail, but it's actually one of the hardest things to preserve in a remaster. Licenses, studio agreements, permissions for characters owned by different companies, all of this is a massive legal and administrative headache. The fact that this was maintained means there was real work behind the scenes to ensure the experience remained complete. For those who played the original in 2010, unlocking these items in TF2 was almost a ritual. You'd sit at the poker table, try to win the right hand against the right characters, and be rewarded with something you could take into a completely different game. It was a crossover that actually worked, not just a passive Easter egg. You had to earn it. This created a connection between two games that normally would have nothing to do with each other. What impresses me is that Valve and Skunk Ape managed to keep this alive. TF2 is still active in 22.6, and having these items circulating again will inevitably bring in a new generation of players who never experienced it back then. People will discover Poker Night specifically because of TF2, and vice versa. It's the kind of detail that turns a remaster from more of the same into something that still has a reason to exist. The remaster was developed by Skunk Ape Games, a studio formed by former Telltale Games employees. And not just any employees. These are the people who worked directly on the original game back in 2010. Think about it. These guys know every detail of that project, every design decision, every cut joke, and every mechanic that almost made it in. They aren't trying to recreate something someone else made. They are revisiting their own work. And that changes everything. When a studio takes over a project from another team, there's always the risk of losing the essence, you know? Of trying to hit the tone and missing by an inch. But when the same creative minds return to the table, literally in the case of this poker game, the chance of it sounding authentic is much higher. It's like a musician remastering their own album instead of letting someone else record a cover. Skunk Ape had already proven what they're capable of with the Sam & Max series remasters, which turned out excellent. Seeing this same studio rescue Poker Night makes a lot of sense, and honestly gives me a level of confidence I wouldn't have with any other team. Sometimes the best guardian of a work is the one who created it. This is the fact that surprised me most, because it reveals something few players knew at the time. The original game had serious issues at the table. The poker code for Poker Night at the inventory was completely discarded and rewritten from scratch for the remaster. It wasn't just a fix here or an adjustment there, it was a total restart. This makes perfect sense when you discover the reason. The opponents in the original didn't follow the rules correctly. There were illegal re-raise bugs happening, which basically means the game could make moves that would be considered invalid in a real casino. For a game whose entire core is poker, that's a fundamental problem. The funny thing is that most people who played the original probably never consciously noticed. You were so focused on the hilarious dialogue, the jokes, and the personalities that the mechanical inconsistencies went overlooked. But they were there, and you likely lost a hand at some point that made no sense, and just blamed it on bad luck. It happens more than we realize in games like this. Rebuilding the AI from scratch and giving opponents more logical betting behaviors is the kind of improvement that doesn't appear on the box art, doesn't get a trailer, and doesn't make headlines, but it's exactly what separates a lazy remaster from one made with genuine care. Skunk Ape could have released the game with patched up original code, and no one would have complained. The fact that they chose not to says a lot about the respect they have for their craft. This curiosity is about something most people notice but can't always explain. The characters just look right now, and there's a very specific reason for that. Each character received a different approach in the update, and I'm impressed that Skunk Ape didn't just apply a generic high-resolution filter to everyone equally. Max, for example, uses the refined model from the Sam & Max trilogy remasters, which makes total sense since the same studio handles both projects. There is a visual consistency that connects these works in a way that only works because the same people are making the decisions. Strong Bad's case is perhaps the most technically interesting. He was originally designed as a vector art character with clean edges and that flash animation aesthetic characteristic of Homestar Runner. Translating that into a 3D model was always a challenge, and the 2010 original handled it reasonably well, but not perfectly. With more polygons and rethought shading, he now looks much closer to what you imagine when you think of the character. And that difference, as small as it seems, changes how you relate to him during the game. And having Tycho updated to resemble the Penny Arcade paintings and posters from the time of the original release is a detail only someone who truly understands where these characters came from would think to do. It's respect for the source material. It's the difference between modeling a character and modeling the essence of a character. This level of attention to each of the four characters separately shows that this remaster was treated as a work of art, not just a product. You know that feeling of opening a game you already know and realizing it has adapted to you? That's exactly what the buy-in adjustment option does in Poker Night at the Inventory Remaster. The mechanic is straightforward. Before sitting at the table, you choose the starting amount for each player from $1,000 to $200,000, with the default at $10,000. It seems like just a number, but that number defines the pace of everything. A low buy-in means every chip carries more weight. Decisions are slower and more calculated. A high buy-in puts everyone under different pressure. All-ins happen faster, matches are shorter, and the game takes on a completely different energy. Poker Night always lived in that tension between being a real poker simulator and basically being a comedy show with cards. This option resolves that conflict elegantly because it doesn't change the dialogue, the characters, or the game's identity. It just gives you control over the intensity of the experience. And the detail I appreciate most is that the original never had this. It's not a bug fix or a visual update. It's a new feature designed for someone playing in 2006 who doesn't necessarily have 2 hours available for a full match. This shows that Skunk Ape wasn't just preserving the past, they were improving it. There's something about the setting of card games that few people mention, but it makes all the difference for immersion. The atmosphere of the place where you're playing, that's exactly why this new addition to the remaster caught my attention. The game now features cinematic visual options, including optional film grain and motion blur filters. It might seem like a minor aesthetic detail, but it completely changes how you perceive the Inventory Club during matches. Think about the concept of this setting. The Inventory isn't a flashy, luxurious Las Vegas casino. It's a secret, somewhat obscure club where characters from totally different universes hide away to play cards and talk shop. When you activate that film grain, the screen gains a texture that instantly evokes classic films or an authentic late-night bar. Suddenly, you aren't just looking at 3D models on your screen, you're experiencing a much more engaging cinematic scene. Motion blur steps in to smooth out and give weight to the movements at the table. You know when the heavy slams his chips down or when Max has one of those exaggerator reactions in his chair? That blur brings much greater drama to those small animations. The coolest part is that the dev team perfectly understood that aesthetics are extremely personal, so they left these settings entirely optional in the menu. If you prefer the clean, sharp image of the original release, just turn it all off. But I highly recommend you test it with these filters on, at least for your first night of playing. Delivering this more artistic atmosphere to the setting shows that the creators didn't just want the title to run at modern resolutions. They really wanted to elevate the work's art direction. It's this kind of care with visual presentation that makes me respect the work done here. This is one of those changes that seems obvious when you read it, but in practice, it represents a real transformation in how the game can be experienced today compared to 2010. The original was made exclusively with the mouse in mind, which made sense for the time. It was a PC game developed by a studio focused on point and click, and clicking on chips and cards with a cursor was the natural way to interact. But the world has changed a lot since then. The Steam Deck has become a truly relevant platform. Console gaming has grown, and the idea of lying on the couch with a controller in hand to play a relaxing game of poker is much more attractive than sitting at a computer with a mouse and keyboard. The remaster recognizes this and delivers full gamepad support. And when I say full support, I don't mean that half-baked support some games have where half the functions still require a mouse, but navigating menus, placing bets, managing chips, all of it now works floofily with a controller. This opens the game to a much larger audience, especially those playing on a Steam Deck during a trip, or who simply want to enjoy the content in a more comfortable position. What pleases me most about this decision is that it democratizes access without compromising anything for those who prefer the mouse. You still have the original option if you want it, but now Poker Night has a place on the couch, on the Steam Deck, and on consoles. A game that was always about relaxing at a table with iconic characters talking deserved this kind of accessibility from the start. The original 2010 Poker Night at the Inventory never existed on any Sony console. It was a PC title, then it hit Xbox and Nintendo Switch with the remaster, but PlayStation was left out for over a decade. This means a huge slice of players, the millions who play exclusively in the Sony ecosystem, simply never had access to this experience. With the PS4 being one of the most popular platforms in gaming history, this absence was significant. Now, with the official release on PS4 and guaranteed compatibility with PS5, the game finally reaches this audience. And there's something interesting about this situation. Those playing on PlayStation for the first time don't have that nostalgia for the original to compare it to. They get the most polished version right out of the gate with reconstructed AI, updated models, and native controller support. In a way, the PlayStation audience will have the best possible first impression of the title. It makes me think that this debut on Sony's platform probably wouldn't have happened without the remaster. The original was out of print for years due to licensing issues, and rebuilding the project from scratch gave Skunk Ape the opportunity to negotiate a presence on platforms where the game had never been. It's one of those cases where the work of preserving and updating a title ends up opening doors that the original version never could. Before The Walking Dead became the phenomenon that redefined narrative games, before The Wolf Among Us, before Game of Thrones and all the other big licenses, Telltale started with a poker game. Telltale Texas Hold'em was the studio's first title, released years before any major success, at a time when the company was still trying to figure out what it wanted to be. It was simple, it was modest, but it was the starting point for everything that came after. Poker Night at the Inventory, then, is not just a card game. With iconic characters, it is a direct tribute to those origins, a way for the studio to look back and recognize where it came from. There's something very beautiful in that, because Poker as a central mechanic carries this historical weight for Telltale in a way no other genre could. It's as if the game is saying that even after all the success, that first table still matters. What makes the remaster even more significant in this context is that Telltale as we knew it no longer exists. The studio closed and reopened under new management, but much of the original creative soul is right there at Skunk Ape. So seeing these people preserve and celebrate a title that is essentially a tribute to the beginning of it all carries real emotional weight. It's not empty nostalgia. It's a team honoring its own history in a genuine way.
So I won't give up, I'm gonna make it to the top. I don't care what's in my way, I swear I'm never gonna stop. I could fall flat on my face and I swear I will get back up, 'cause I don't deserve a thing, and the road ahead